This is chapter 13 of my story. I call it The Wilderness. So here it is, chapter 13, The Wilderness. Kate resumed her busy calendar teaching third grade, and I continued apace with my career in law. At the invitation of my boss, I became a junior partner. Within a year, he announced that he wanted to scale back. I wanted him to stay fully involved, but he would have none of it. He wanted the freedom to come and go at will, to travel extensively, and to work for me part-time. As a result, within a year of placing Chad, I became the sole owner of our firm. In addition to a growing estate, tax planning, and real estate practice, my partner had developed over decades. As a young attorney, I was regularly appointed by the court to represent indigent defendants. I was then hired by the city to replace my retiring partner as its attorney. A neighboring town soon followed suit, so I became their attorney as well. The practice blossomed, so I hired an associate. By the time I was in my early 30s, I was one of the top-rated attorneys in the district. Kate and I moved to the building my grandparents had bought in 1940, a two-story brownstone on Main Street. Grandpa had a John Deere store downstairs, and they lived in the largest of several apartments upstairs. Kate and I moved to their apartment and soon expanded into another one. I bought the building and immediately began remodeling its 7,000 square feet. Nothing had been updated in decades, so it needed a new wiring system, which had to be in conduit, a totally new plumbing system, the restoration of 7 bathrooms and 2 kitchens, framing, insulation, and new wallboard on all the outer walls, 24 new windows, all fitted to the brick facade, and much more. The local new construction market was booming. Because new, clean, residential construction was easier and more profitable, contractors, electricians, and plumbers effectively refused to do all but the basics on our building. I was largely on my own. Electricians in town did not want to crawl around my attic, cutting and piecing conduit and then threading wires through each line, so I did it, even though it was supposed to all be licensed electrical work. Similarly, plumbers effectively refused to do all but the basics for the building. They made suggestions, prodded me along, and left me to do it myself. In effect, it forced me to learn the essentials of each trade. I removed ancient cast iron sewer lines from basement through the attic and replaced them with plastic. The nearly rusted out water pipes had to be scrapped to make way for newly soldered copper lines. I spent countless hours cutting, gluing, and soldering. In the end, the tradesman would look over my work, make a few modifications, order an inspection, and the state would then approve it. All of that frenzied activity kept my head full of things I was constantly doing when not in the office. For the most part, my many activities may have hidden from others the pain of a shattered family and a disconnected marital relationship. Sometimes now I wonder if my friends did not ask me about Chad because they were without words to broach the issue, or did it appear to them that my many activities meant that I had been unaffected by having a damaged child, or both. I bought a 2-place Cessna trainer with John, a friend of mine, so we could take flying lessons. I had always wanted to fly. It was, I believed, in my blood. My grandfather had been a pioneer in aviation in Montana, building on his own land the airstrip that would become the Billings Airport, the largest and busiest one in the state for a century. At that time, he came to know a fledgling mechanic named Charles Lindbergh, before he had even learned to fly, letting him sleep in the hangar's warm boiler room when Charles had no place to go. When Amelia Earhart landed at the airport, there were several inches of snow on the ground. As she descended from the plane, Grandpa swooped her up into his arms and carried her to the hangar. He had personally known the 2 most famous pilots on the planet during the golden age of flying. My mom's older sister, inspired by meeting Amelia, learned to fly and became one of the elite Women's Air Corps during World War II, ferrying bombers and fighters from manufacturing plants to training centers all over the United States. And my dad had been a stellar bomber pilot, with more than 20 missions over Germany. I would be a natural, at least that's what I thought. I loved the fact that flying so consumed my presence that nothing else mattered. At every moment, it was life or death. It required a singular focus. The rest of my life disappeared. No trying legal cases, no construction challenges, no employee problems or marital frustrations penetrated my intense focus while learning to fly. Neither in those magical moments aloft did I have time to reflect on how profoundly my life had changed the day Chad was born. John, my Cessna partner, had woodworking tools which complemented mine, so we expanded our shared wood shop. Christmas was a busy time. We made toys, dollhouses, stools, trucks, and dressers. At times, especially when woodworking alone, I pondered the day after Chad had been born when I drove home from the hospital, knowing deep down that he had been irreparably damaged. On that morning, I had prayed that he could at least join me in the wood shop. But there were no little pair of hands learning to pound nails. No curious little questions, no sword, bird box, or boat projects for us to share. No matter how much our nephews and nieces loved what we made for them, I had an empty place that no amount of craftsmanship would fill. Our secretary was an accomplished artist, mostly working with acrylics. I admired her work. One day she asked if I had any personal artistic interest. I shared that I could not possibly do what she did, as I was pretty pathetic with a paintbrush, charcoal, or drawing pencils, but had whittled as a kid and might like sculpting. With her encouragement, I bought some oven-bakeable clay. My first attempt was from a drawing entitled The Scout, done by Charlie Russell, a contemporary of Frederick Remington. When I showed it to my secretary, she became ecstatic, encouraging me to do more. My first bronze was a depiction of Amos, a bison bull who lived on my grandmother's ranch. I sold 5 of them the first weekend I got one back from the foundry. Soon I had casting wax, a dozen different projects, then bronzes cast from my originals. In all, I perhaps sculpted and sold 150 copies. As flying had done, nothing penetrated my mental sphere while sculpting. John launched into the Boy Scouts, taking on the task of rehabilitating a dying troop, the one to which I had belonged as a kid. He recruited me, and we recruited leaders, a scoutmaster, and our first batch of adventuresome boys to go on outings and campouts. Eventually, John became the weekend campout guy with his guitar, storytelling, and campfire cooking, for which he was so exceptional. I much preferred the wilderness hikes where the kids were so exhausted after hiking all day that they slumbered in their tents even before dusk had settled. Each summer we took at least one long hike in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, a rugged, uninhabited, and pristine area in the northern Rockies adjacent to Glacier Park. Our treks typically lasted 6 to 10 days and covered 50 to 100 miles. We crossed mountain passes, saw snow in midsummer, and witnessed every manner of wild animal from chipmunks to grizzlies. More often than not, we packed for days without seeing another group of hikers or horseback campers. The scouts ranged from 11 to 15. Many of them had never been away from Mom for more than a day. Neither had they ever been required to hike 8 or 10 miles a day with a heavy pack. Once we loaded up and began down the trail, no matter how hard the trail was, there was no going back. The first day was always torturous, with breaks every 15 minutes and lots of whining. By the time we got to the 5th day, the kids loaded quickly and raced along the trails in their new wild adventure. We crossed raging ice-cold streams, wound around perilous mountain trails, and chugged up switchbacks to crest above the timberline where we could see for 50 miles. They learned to pitch tents, scrub filthy pots, and rave about food that they had prepared for themselves, but would have griped about at home. All of us reluctant but filthy hikers bathed in icy mountain streams. It was vastly more fun when we constructed a plastic sweat lodge, started a fire, poured water over hot rocks, and ran from a steaming tent into an icy stream. Through it all, I witnessed 100 boys take strides to becoming men. In quiet moments on the trail, I occasionally dipped into the heartbreaking reality that my own child, Chad, wonderfully cared for by Mona, would never join us in the mountains. A child who is blind, who cannot even crawl or roll over by himself, much less walk, would never come to know all that I had shared with these boys. Even when I was far from the mountain wilderness, I was very much in a wilderness of my own making. That's chapter 13. Thanks so much for watching and for your encouragement, and I am delighted, often tearfully, when I read the stories that you share of your own lives at the bottom in the comments. And for those of you who have not done so, take a look. It's amazing. So I will share with you as we go along this journey. Many of you have offered prayers and thanks and encouragement and want to know how I'm doing. And I have to say to you, this story, where I am right now, is 40 years ago. And believe it or not, I've recovered from where I was. It doesn't make life unpainful at times when I review some of the places where I have been many, many years ago. But I know that virtually all of you have had events, challenges, threats, life-endangering occurrences in your own lives as well. And so perhaps my sharing will encourage you to move forward as well. What I hope to do by the end of this story is to share with you what I've learned and how it has helped me grow to become a different person. Thanks so much for watching.